Beginning in the 1970s as a mail-order catalog, the Surfcaster has long been known as the source for hard-to-find surf fishing gear, and I've been personally shopping with them since the 1980s. They offer honest advice and the best recommendations regardless of your experience level, and will tailor their suggestions to what you actually need.
As you would expect from a business that's been serving the surfcasting community for 50 years, their prices are competitive and delivery is always quick and secure. They want you to have the best possible experience in the surf and have the knowledge and inventory to put the right gear in your hands to make that happen. So check out the Surfcaster at www.thesurfcaster.com, and if you're in the area, stop into their brand new brick and mortar store in Shelton, Connecticut. Welcome back to the Surfcast Podcast. We are happy to be here to entertain you today on this Monday episode. Before we get started with the regular episode, I want to make a fairly big announcement, something that I have been being asked about now for more than a year, since basically I said I wasn't going to do it last time, and that is that Surf Scenarios Seminar Series is returning for 2026. So yes, there is going to be a seminar series this year. It's going to start in January, the end of January. Sign-up details will be coming probably at the very beginning of December, so after Thanksgiving, and you'll be able to find out a little bit more about what's going on. But I just want to throw it out now, since so many people have been emailing me and asking me since, like I said I wasn't doing the last time, they started asking me, are you going to do it next time? I just wanted to throw it out there. I will probably talk about it each episode of the podcast a little bit at the beginning as sort of a little advertisement, but something I wanted to answer right away that I've gotten multiple questions about is that what's the difference between the seminar series and what we do on the podcast? And quite frankly, there's quite a few things, but one of the biggest is that I go into much more depth. If you are someone who's been listening to the podcast is like, God, I wish they would do hour, 2 hour, 3 hour episodes all the time, you're going to love the seminar series because that's what I do. I pick a topic and delve into it for 3-4 hours. I try to make them 3, but they always end up be 3.5 to 4.
I was to say, I don't think any of them has been under 3.
No, I don't think any of them has been under 3 in the past 4 years. This will be year 5. And so because I have so much time, I can go into a lot more depth. And that is one of the key differences. But along those same lines, one of the big differences is this is not a TV show that we're doing here. This is a podcast, even though we put it up on YouTube. The seminar series almost is a TV show. I can do lots of drawing. I can do lots of annotation. I can take apart satellite maps. I can draw cartoons and diagrams and charts and graphs. And we do a lot of that. And those visual aids is really a huge difference between this and the podcast, because this is a podcast and that's a seminar series. So look for more details soon. I'll tease this as well. If you are a prior year Surf Scenarios subscriber, there's going to be an email coming soon because I'm going to be relying upon you to help me make an important decision. So look for that in the coming weeks as well. So thanks for listening to that little advertisement. Thank you, Toby, for letting me do that.
Yeah. I'll say real quick, it's just Jerry. It's not the two of us on those. It's just something that he runs. He has guests, etc., which will show the details. But I've been a listener, subscriber, however you want to put it, every year to all the episodes. And what I always really appreciate, there's always something to take away, like whether you've been at it for 40 years or 4 weeks, equal benefit on both sides. So don't think it's like two levels, too low a level potentially for you or too high a level. No, like Jerry does a good job nailing it for everyone. So I definitely give a high recommendation for those of you that are unfamiliar with it from past years to give it a look or listen this year.
Well, thanks, Toby. That was unplanned kind words. I appreciate that.
Absolutely.
Toby's been a part of it every year too, which is kind of cool as a subscriber. So anyways, that's Surf Scenarios. Again, look for details coming soon. It'll be on the website. We'll announce when stuff's available or whatever. So, Toby, what is the topic for today?
So today is it's a theme subject that came up twice to me very recently. And it's a phenomenon, whatever you want to call it, where the wind conditions are so extreme that they greatly alter predicted tide stage, predicted tide conditions. So much so on my recent 2 times that the first one, briefly, I arrived 2 hours into the drop at a spot, expecting there to be a little extra water. So that's why I kind of, normally it's a high tide spot. I was like, I'm going to show up about 2 hours in, surf should be down, water should be down. And it was still higher up the beach and covering rocks that a normal high tide doesn't even touch. So I couldn't even imagine what it looked like at the extreme top of the tide. It was so high that I couldn't even fish it 2 hours in. I just called it a night. Then a few days later, I went out, within, 3 or 4 days. And it was the extreme opposite, where the wind had pushed the tide so much, they were opposing forces, that I arrived at high tide, and it was the equivalent of 2.5 to 3 hours down, to the point where I immediately walked out and I checked my watch saying, did I screw this up again and look high tide, low tide? So because these kind of popped up such extreme scenarios or examples of it, I figured it might be something interesting for us to discuss today. So it's really the extreme effects that wind conditions can have on affecting the predicted tide stage in the surf.
So it's interesting. When we were sort of planning this episode, I didn't even really think about it. I was just in Florida recently, which we're going to do some episodes, some kind of special episodes talking about my adventures because some great things happened. But when I was just in Florida, I actually had a scenario where the tide never turned because the wind was so strong. So the tide never even turned. It just perpetually kept going. Where I was fishing, it just perpetually kept going out. It was supposed to start coming in, and Florida's kind of weird. They have these half tides, so that was a little bit of a factor. But it was supposed to be coming in, and that was sort of the window I was supposed to be targeting. And instead, it just kept coming out because it was being pushed by such a strong wind. The wind was only supposed to be like 10 knots, gusting to 20, but it was like sustained 20, gusting 35. So I don't know how they screwed that up so bad. But I couldn't believe the difference it made. Now, Toby, I got a question for you. When I showed up at this spot and I was targeting this particular window, when I got there and the wind had, basically altered the tide, I just bailed. Did you bail, or did you try to fish through this, or did you change something to try to So
yeah, both examples, when the water was way too high for the tide stage and way too low for the tide stage, I stayed and fished. When it was way too high for where it should have been for that stage of the tide, when the water was, literally feet above where it would be 2 hours earlier, and it was just wild. After I kind of got over the fact that it was so extreme, I looked around, I got my bearings, and I was able to, I watched the water for a while, and I was like, all right, even though the rock that would normally be bone dry and 2 feet out of the water now is completely submerged, I was able to see where it was. I swam out, I got onto that rock. It felt very foreign to even be that high, but I fished. I gave it some time. I quickly accepted there wasn't anything really going on. I gave it maybe 10 minutes. Where I kind of, when I was going, I was saying, I'm going to give this a few minutes and just see. If I don't get some sign of life or some positive response, I'm going to try to adjust. So nothing happened in, several minutes. And then I said, well, there's 2 other spots relatively close to this. I'm just going to hit them while I'm out. It was raining. I was in the wetsuit. I'd already geared up. Like, mentally, I was in I want to fish mode. So sure. I tried to make something of it. So I went to these other 2 spots, and it was the same scenario there. They were very close by. I didn't expect it to be like I went to this other spot, and hey, it's normal where it should be. I knew it was going to still be off, but I figured maybe there's a shot there was some fish. I gave each of those a few minutes. Nothing happened, and I bailed. And then the second scenario where it was way lower than it should have been, I actually had Aiden, my son, with me that night. And it was the first time he'd ever gone to the spot, and I was telling him all about it. He knows of this spot through me talking to him in the past. And I was explaining as we get there, and then I look at it, and I turned to him, and I said, if you weren't here tonight, and we didn't go through all this to get here, I would probably give this 2 casts and get the hell out of here. I was like, but let's just tough it out. And actually, we spent, at least 2 hours there that night. I ended up pulling a few fish, nothing spectacular. Basically, I caught what I would have expected to catch So I'm guessing it felt like it was 3 hours into the drop, even though it was high tide, like the water level was there. And what I would expect to have happened that night if I arrived mid tide is what I got. I got some small fish. They were where they would have been at that stage. Aiden had a few hits. There was other extremes with wind that was what we didn't expect. The level, the direction. There was surf. Like for him, at a brand new spot, first time ever going there, like it was the worst set of conditions for him to have to deal with. Like, here, let's just make it extra difficult on you.
Good luck, Aiden.
Yeah, like, hey, stand on that rock. At one point, I looked over and his feet are up in the air. Like he got knocked down on his ass and got right back up. Like he was like, oh, this is great. He enjoyed it, but if I was on my own, like I said, I probably wouldn't have given it as much because it looked like a stage of the tide that I don't really like at that spot. But because again, it's like that's that mid tide stage at this place where I don't do a whole lot unless something, unless there's a special event going on, like your average tides, it's not good average nights, mid tide isn't good there. So, it was good that I stuck it out and found some, but if I was solo, I probably would have said, screw this, gone home, take a shower, gone to sleep.
Well, so this brings up, brings up a question I wanted to ask, and you just transitioned it perfectly. So knowing that certain winds will affect the tide height or even the current direction, do you ever target this? Do you ever think like, okay, wow, look, the wind is this, it's like honking. I know then that this spot will fish better because it'll have a bigger push or it'll be delayed or whatever. Do you ever target anything like that?
I don't necessarily go in that respect that I account for it improving the situation. If it's a moderate effect, meaning it has not been blowing for an extended amount of time or an extreme speed with or against the tide, I know it adjusts basically the slack tide. It adjusts when it peaks and starts going out. So I will adjust my timing to that, but it doesn't necessarily give me extra, hop to my step. There's no extra excitement. I'm not like, oh, when you get it added in on this, it makes it better. I haven't really experienced that. It's more just it tweaks the timing of things. But the reason I immediately realized it in both of these cases after the fact, why it was just so damn extreme is because it wasn't, 3 hours of a wind plus tide. That was a moderate wind. The one where the wind was going with the tide and it pushed it extra high, it was like 40 to 50 mile an hour winds in the same direction as the current for like 10 hours. Like the entire flood, it was going the same way. So yeah, you're going to have extra. And it was the exact opposite on the other day where it was super low, where the wind and the tide were against each other, literally 20 to 30 miles an hour for just the entire run of the entire flow. So it made sense. It was like afterwards, I'm like, these were two real extreme things that kind of like brought it back to the forefront for me to consider. Normally I watch the weather, how it progresses on a day. Like for instance, as we're recording, I'm planning on fishing tonight. I checked, the wind earlier, and I watch how it develops, what it's doing 10 hours before I plan to fish, because that will affect what's going to happen tonight. But on those days, I just, whatever reason, it didn't dawn on me just how extreme it was going to make things.
I've definitely had those situations where I didn't plan carefully enough and showed up and it was unbelievably extreme. I have stories that I can't tell on the podcast. I can't even tell in the seminar series where I'm a little bit more open with stuff because it would give away too much about the locations. But I have some insane stories. But what I can say is that backwaters, estuaries, these phenomena where the wind is extremely strong one way or the other, either against or with, can make a huge difference. And I've had some crazy things happen. And I will say that if, I'm asking myself the same question, are there places that I target when I see this coming? Those would probably be the places to look. In my experience, I don't see much of a change on like a wide open beach. It doesn't. Now, if you have a hurricane and there's like a big tidal surge, that's different. But in terms of wind event, it doesn't make the big difference. It's kind of like, for me, when I see these extreme winds in certain directions, depending on where I'm fishing, The small areas, the estuaries, are where you can see a big difference. And, listening to you talk here, one of the things I've written about, actually Saltwater Sportsman, and I've talked about the seminars and stuff, I really like the period around when the current is continuing to run, but the tide is switched. So like if you're picturing like an estuary where the current's going out, but the tide has already turned around and it's coming up, you can get these weird intersections. Well, if you've got a wind that's moving with the current coming out of an estuary, and then that can make it run longer. So you can have a longer window where it's running against the rising of the tide. Or if it's been pushing all day, all kinds of water up inside a backwater, it's going to take longer for that to come out. And so that can make a difference as well. So that's really one of the places that I don't know if I would say I target it either, like you said, but it will play a role in my decisions. It's not like I'd be like,
it's like worth consideration.
Yeah, it's not like this spot is a 40-mile-an-hour east wind because I know it's going to push into the estuary or whatever. And it's not like that. I'm not like sitting around waiting like I do for a nor'easter. But the other thing that's interesting, and I've had this happen before for sure, it can help you in the open surf if you have a quarter moon. So if you've got a really strong wind that's really pushing the tide, and you've got this sort of influx of water, if you've got a spot that's really reliant on current, but it's low during the quarter moons, but or even like a moon, it has to be like the bigger moon. So like I have spots that really only fish on the bigger moon. So like one moon, like this year was weird. It was the new moon was bigger than the full moon for most of the year up here. But most of the time, it's the full moon has a bigger tidal exchange than the new moon, right? The full is bigger than the new. One of my spots in particular, you really almost kind of need that full moon and hope for wind and hope for cloud cover and rain and like whatever, because otherwise it's going to suck. Except in the fall, it fishes okay in the new because things kind of get weird, but for most of the year. Anyways, if you've got a really strong wind, I can go to that spot based on the direction and fish the quarter moons because it's going to help along that current and it's going to build current enough that it's going to give the striper enough of an advantage where they'll move into that area where they wouldn't otherwise. So again, I don't know if I would target it because I'd still have to have the right tide. I would still have to have the right, time of year or whatever, but it can increase the productivity. So it's essentially, like we've talked about before, you should always be paying attention to the weather. You should always be paying close attention to the weather and running that weather pattern through your spots, through the grid. I got these 12 spots. What's the tide? Okay, well, these 6 aren't going to work because it's the outgoing and I would need the incoming for them. Okay, well, these 6 outgoing spots, the tide's right, but what's the wind? Okay, it's this. Okay, but what's the wind strength? Oh, okay, that means I can only go to these 2 spots. Well, I've done better at this spot, and then you go there. So you should be paying. But again, I don't know if I really target it.
Well, it'll definitely, like I said, it's like it becomes a consideration, and I guess it almost like does the reverse as you're just thinking it through. Like it does the reverse of targeting. Like it makes me avoid certain pieces because also like when it pushes in really high, let's say if I wanted to fish the high stage, so one consideration, maybe I can't get to where I wanted to fish. I can't stand in the same place. It takes a little longer for the current to get going. Also, one of the things I've experienced, just like a regular higher high tide, is when it pushes in, it grabs more debris and crap. So like the beginning of the dropping tide, that current going out, it pulls extra shit out, and like there's more weeds, there's sticks. I've seen logs, stuff that isn't normally going to get added into your mix. That has been a pain in the butt. There's actually a couple of spots that I have that when a certain wind rolls up and it's on a couple of days, they weed up. Like we've all got those spots that can weed up. And when I see that pattern develop, even on just normal, let alone extreme levels, I know then, okay, I cannot fish until the current has had a couple hours to dump and clean things out for me. If I go right at that high slack, for instance, it's just going to be a mess and it's not going to be worth it. Or I can fish slack before the water starts moving a lot, but the beginning of the flow, when it's sort of cleaning stuff out, that window isn't really fishable. So it definitely becomes more, something for consideration in that degree and avoidance.
Again, paying close attention because, as you stated in your story from earlier, I think one of the most demoralizing things and what just sucks the life out of your fishing and makes you want to quit is when you show up like that realize that, oh my God, it's so high, to get back to the beginning, which may not even be right when I wanted to be here anyways, I'm going to have to wait an hour and a half, and the next hour and a half is going to be a complete waste of time. That's the worst. I mean,
oh yeah,
it's like
that. The day that it was way too high. Again, I had already waited 2 hours. I literally was sitting at home saying, I would normally like to be here right now. I have to wait 2 hours because I know it's going to be up a little bit. There's going to be some surf. Now I'm here, and I looked at him like, I got to wait another hour and a half or 2 hours. Like, am I going to sit on a rock and no, I'm not. And I'm not going to go home, hang out, and then come back out. Like, that's why, again, like I said, that night I was already kind of motivated to go, and I know myself well enough to know that if I have a motivation to go, don't let any doubt slip in, because the moment that steps in, it takes over and I'm done and I'm going home. So I was like, I'm going to try it here. I'm going to go there. I'm going to go there. And I felt confident in leaving and saying, all right, I actually only fished for 30 minutes tonight for the entire investment of energy that I put into it. But I'm confident in knowing that any more I would have been, wasted my time.
Yeah. And I think maybe the takeaway from this, besides like keeping an eye out for these wind events, is that it's a perfect example of fishing the hell out of your spots so you know under all conditions what's going to happen. And that if you're listening to this right now and you're like, wow, that's never really happened to me, I wonder why, maybe when you see a really strong wind event, and let's say, I don't know, let's say your spot depends on pretty high water. Maybe go out when the wind direction and the tidal direction are the same, and maybe they will push a lot of water into your spot, and maybe you'll stumble upon a pattern that's really productive. And maybe the next time you see a wind event like this, instead of being like, well, I'm going to leave at this certain hour, maybe try staying a little bit later, even though the wind is really strong, because maybe that'll open up another exceptional pattern. And I think this is a great example of what we all talk about, like picking a couple spots and fishing to death. And, Toby and I understanding the nuances of our spots and how this is going to affect allows us to be more efficient, because we'll either go because of it or we'll avoid it because of it. Although, Toby, you did a terrible job of that because you went anyways. But
I was just happy that I once again didn't have the tide stage completely backwards or wrong, or, switched around at the wrong location. So I guess I had that going for me.
Yeah. This has been a weekly edition of the Surfcast Podcast. You can find out more about the podcast at surfcastpodcast.com, or definitely check us out on social media, Facebook, Instagram, @the Surfcast Podcast.